The law of cause and effect. Throughout Jesus' ministry, he was teaching two great fundamental principles. The law of cause and effect was one of them. He recognized that this was a world of perfect law and order, not a world of chance or accident. For he said again and again, I came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And that principle, that idea, was always uppermost in his replies to the Pharisees and in his teaching to the multitude. But he spoke these truths and taught these laws symbolically and in parables. The world in his day interpreted him not according to the Spirit, but according to the letter of the law. And the world today is no different than the world of his day, though we have highly illumined souls who, seeing these things from a deeper consciousness, understand and interpret them from an entirely different plane than does the mass mind. When Jesus was before Pontius Pilate and refused to answer the questions which were asked him, Pilate said, Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee? Jesus said, Thou couldst have no power against me except it were given thee from above. I take up my life and I lay it down, and until my time comes, or in other words, until the effects of the causes which he had set in motion had run out, it would be an impossibility for you to condemn or kill me. Think ye not that I could summon 12 legions of angels? Why, certainly he could, because from his plane of consciousness, he could reach out into this great formless substance everywhere around us and bring to him the thing with which he related, and that was the law which he was everywhere teaching mankind. The intellectually developed but ignorant mind will call this fate, but that is not true. Fate implies the impossibility of changing the effects once the cause has been set in motion. But I know there's no such thing as fate, as we usually understand its meaning. What we call fate is only the effect of causes we have unconsciously and ignorantly set in motion, and which we have not yet learned how to antidote. The effects of any cause, no matter how deep-seated and powerful it may be, can be set aside or antidoted, either in whole or in part, according to the consciousness we generate, any time before the harvest period arrives. Once the harvest is in full swing, it's then too late. When Jesus said, Love your enemies, bless them which despitefully use you, what did he mean? Simply this, that when we became harmonious within, we would recognize the oneness of all life, and we would generate within ourselves a harmonious energy which would enable us to love those enemies. He did not teach that we had to love their manifestations, but to recognize and love the one life in us all. He knew that unless we had generated the destructive energy which caused such persons to do these things to us, it would be impossible for them to become our enemies. For instance, this morning, shortly after my arrival, I went outside to put the subject of my morning talk on the bulletin, and just as I was coming in the door, an old gray-haired man came up to me, and he said, What is this New Thought Church? What does it teach? I replied, It teaches the psychology of life. I had not noticed the attitude or the inharmonious condition in which the old man was, but when I answered his question in a quiet way, he doubled up his fist and shook it under my nose and angrily said, There's only one psychology of life, and that is God, the Lord Jesus Christ, who died to save you and me. Now that dear old man never realized it was not the thing he said, but the way in which he said it, that made all the difference in the world. And he will go home, have dyspepsia or indigestion from his dinner, or a touch of gout, or rheumatism, as a result of trying in his way to convert me, to save me from an impending doom, by getting angry at me. He will wonder what in the world he has ever done to cause that inharmony. And he will say, Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, not realizing that God never chastens, God never punishes, God never rewards. God simply is. And in accordance with the use we make of this God energy, do we reward or punish ourselves? And that it is impossible for Jesus or any other person, man, woman, or God, to save us, but ourselves, and that no man, woman, or God can condemn us but ourselves. We wonder as we go on in our unfoldment why it is we do not have certain things, why it is when we live what we think is a good life that we meet with these so-called accidents, with sickness, pain, and disease, with these losses on the external plane. A student once came into my office in a very excited frame of mind and said, "Mr. Sears, I have been robbed." Her place of business had been broken into, and her stock cleaned out so completely that practically nothing was left that could be taken away. She said, "Where in the world did I generate the destructive energy to relate with this loss?" I said, "My dear woman, we haven't time now to question how or where you created that destructive energy. We know that you did create it, or you could not have been robbed. The only thing to do now is to generate the harmonious energy which will antidote the effects of these causes which lie before you on the external plane. And instead of living in the consciousness of the loss which you see materialized before you, live in the consciousness of your oneness with the law of harmony. And know that those goods cannot stay away from you any length of time, because you have attracted them to you under the law of harmony, and you have only generated enough inharmony to relate you with their temporary loss." We held to that thought, to that ideation, to that image, and forgot the inharmony, the question of what destructive force she had set in motion to relate her with the loss originally. And the result was that inside of the next 3 weeks, all but $300 worth of her goods were returned to her, and without the aid of the police. Several years ago, there was a certain teacher engaged in this work who was very envious and jealous of the success of another teacher. And I will say here that I do not know of any more destructive force that can be used than envy and jealousy. I believe it's more destructive than anger or hatred. It seems to have a sting to it that even anger and hatred do not produce. This first teacher circulated the story that the second teacher was a spiritualist and was holding seances, trying by that statement to discredit the second teacher. Now, even had the first teacher's statement been true, it was not what she said nor whether it was true or not, but it was the energy back of the statement. And that energy was jealousy, envy, malice. Its truthfulness or falsity was immaterial, but as a matter of fact, the statement was not true. Within a year, the newspapers of that city came out and depicted the different metaphysical teachers that worked there. And in cartoon and an article on the front page, the first teacher, the one who had circulated the false story, was characterized as a spiritualist teaching and holding seances. She never realized the law of cause and effect. She never understood it. Otherwise, she never would have set the causes in motion which related her with the destructive effects. How often we hear persons say, when some teacher or new thought follower is sick or meets with disaster of some kind, "Oh, I thought you were a new thought teacher, and I suppose you could not get sick. I suppose you could not have a loss. I suppose nothing of that kind could come to you." Let me say first, last, and all the time that it's immaterial what we call ourselves. It is immaterial who we are, or how much or how little we know. It is immaterial how much we may think we know. The law of cause and effect is always in operation, and no one, great or small, big or little, is exempt from it. And anyone who sets in motion negative, destructive causes of any kind has to pay the price of their effects, unless they set in motion the constructive energy which will antidote such causes. There is one thing, however, we want to impress upon our minds with such strength and power we will always remember it. And that is, there never has been a destructive cause set in motion by any life, no matter how destructive it may have been, but what it can be antidoted any time before the harvest, when we know and use the constructive power. But there comes a time in everyone's life when the harvest is on, the grain is ripened, and we must then reap the effects. It is too late then to antidote it for that time. But we have always this blessed promise and this blessed knowledge that no matter how often we may reap the effects of our causes, there is always a new day and a new hour and a new time every moment of our lives when we can set new and constructive causes in motion through relating in our thought world with the universal law of harmony. One time, the 20th century limited New York Central train broke in two while running at great speed, a thing which never occurred before and has not occurred since in the history of that remarkable train. Just as the train separated, a man was in the act of stepping from one car to another, and he fell on the tracks below and was instantly killed. The papers heralded it as an accident, so it was when we look at it with the eyes of the objective world. But is this a world of chance? Is it a world of accidents? Is it a world of chaos, where even a fly may brush its wing by chance? Were it such, then there's no law and order anywhere in it. But when we find law and order in one thing, we may be sure there is law and order in everything. Could we go deeply into the history of this man who was in the act of stepping from one car to another on that vestibule train when it broke in two, a train equipped with every safety appliance known to man, and read his records, examine his inner consciousness, we would very easily find where this man generated the negative, destructive energy interiorly through anger, hatred, fear, worry, anxiety, jealousy, envy, strife, or some one or more of the 1,000 negative destructive things. We could very easily find where he set sufficient causes in motion to relate him with that so-called accident. Remember this, there's only one energy in the universe, but there are two manifestations of it. Every moment of our lives, we're utilizing this energy, either constructively or destructively. That's the natural law of life, because only as we create, destroy, recreate, and redestroy the material form can we refine what is called matter into what is called spirit, or into finer and finer grades of material. And so we are constantly creating, destroying, recreating, and redestroying. And in accordance with our use of this energy, harmoniously or inharmoniously do we create and destroy. Every thought we think relates us with some kind of current on the unseen side of life. We have heard throughout all time that we are held accountable for every idle thought, but we have never realized, understood, and appreciated what that meant. Being held accountable for every idle thought is simply that every thought we think produces a certain vibratory rate in the atoms of our body. And that vibratory rate relates us with the current on the unseen side of life, which is in harmony with the vibration we set up. And in establishing that relationship, we draw from the current on the unseen side of life the material which goes to make our bodies and our environment, and in that way are we held accountable for every idle thought and materialize every constructive thought as well. A few years ago, the world was appalled by the terrible earthquake at Messina, Italy, where over 50,000 persons were killed outright. 17 days after the earthquake, the seekers among the debris heard a cry and unearthed an 18-month-old baby that was still alive. Was that an accident? Was it chance that the 18-month-old baby had lived for 17 days without food or drink, when over 50,000 strong men and women had died? We may say, why, how could an innocent baby like that have set in motion the causes to relate it even with such an accident as we call it? Had that baby's existence begun with its incarnation in that particular physical body and ended with its death, we could not answer. But the life, the mind, the intelligence, the consciousness, the ego that came and inhabited that body, and the ego which comes and inhabits the body of each one of us at the time of our birth and leaves it at what we call death, has always lived. It has always existed, always is. is now, and ever shall be, but it changes the form of the material body through which it manifests again and again. That baby had set in motion in its former incarnations the negative destructive causes which related it with the so-called accident. Otherwise, it could not have been there at that time. And those 50,000 persons or more who were gathered together from all quarters of the globe, why did they go there? Because the energy which they had generated directed them to that one place where, under the law they had made for themselves, the destructive force, focused at that one central point by the combined negative consciousness or thought of all those persons, was sufficient to cause the earthquake. Science explains it from the volcanic conditions of the earth underneath, and that is a good scientific explanation. But what caused that volcanic condition to occur at that particular moment, that particular time? People were going in and out of Messina every day. Why did it not occur the day before and engulf lots of persons who were there then but who left? Why did it not occur the day after and thus allow some persons who were there that day it occurred to escape? Because back of all of our so-called scientific explanations is this great law of cause and effect. Back of every material manifestation is the energy which produced it, and that energy is thought, mind, intelligence, consciousness, and whether we know it or not, it's always working. I do not refer to the intellectual consciousness generated by the physical brain, but rather the soul energy or consciousness which manifests through it. All energy we generate must have some outlet, some manifestation in form, unless we antidote it. And so by those subtle laws we are drawn together until we form a combination strong and powerful enough to make a center where the energy is focused and thus enable the law to work out the effects of the causes we have set in motion. We've recently been regaled in the newspapers with the so-called Brandt case. Brandt was the valet of a multimillionaire, and he was sentenced to prison for 30 years for committing an act which technically and therefore legally he never committed. Why was it impossible for him to save himself from that 30-year sentence, which has recently been set aside? Why was it not possible for him to have received a sentence of only 5 years, which he has already served? Because of two reasons. First, he had generated within himself, through one or more of these various causes which we have stated, anger, hatred, fear, worry, anxiety, etc., negative destructive energy, which related him with all the shame, with all the punishment a 30-year sentence in prison would incur. And by reason of that negative energy, he had made himself a fitting instrument in the hands of the universal law to work out in someone else's life the effects of the causes which those persons had set in motion. And so man-made law is moving, not because man moves it, but because the universal God is behind it. And be ye not deceived, for God is not mocked, and whatsoever a man soweth, that also shall he reap. Not long ago I saw a little girl, some 7 or 8 years old, a beautiful child, as sweet and lovable in her manifestations on that occasion as one would wish to meet. I saw her again in one of the wildest furies imaginable, over nothing. But it's unimportant whether she had cause on the objective plane to get angry or not. She was wild with rage. At that time I said, she does not realize the negative destructive energy she's setting in motion. She does not realize that unless it is antidoted with kindness and love and harmonious energy, that somewhere down the line of her cosmic journey she will reap the effects of the causes which she has set in motion today. For some 3 or 4 months that child has been lying in the hospital with one part of her body burned to a crisp. Repeated attempts have been made at skin grafting, but so far they've been unsuccessful. Now don't misunderstand me. Just that one flaring up of anger was not sufficient to have generated the negative destructive energy which that child is now reaping. But that display of temper showed what? That it was not the first time, but that it was the character, the habit which the child had brought over from its last incarnation. What is character? What is habit? It's the repetition of a thing over and over again until we do it unconsciously, unthinkingly, and it becomes a fixed thing in our lives. It becomes natural to us, we say, and then it becomes what we call character. Had the parents of the child understood this law of cause and effect, they would have begun early to have taught her love and harmony, taught her how to relate with the harmonious energy, how to have breathed love in this atmosphere of harmony, until it had antidoted and established within itself the habit, not of getting angry, not of flying off on a tangent, but the habit of being kind, loving, and considerate to those with whom it came in contact. Recently, I read a poem relating to the woolen workers at Lawrence, Massachusetts, who went on a strike because the average wage paid them was only $5.23 a week, and upon which a family was supposed to live. Be ye not deceived, for God, the great universal law, is not mocked, and whatsoever a man soweth, that also shall he reap. Had not those mill workers generated within their own thought world, somewhere back down the line of their cosmic journey, the negative destructive energy through anger, hatred, fear, worry, anxiety, etc., which related them with such conditions on the external plane, they would not have been there. Why are we not there? Why them instead of us? Simply because we've not generated within ourselves the negative destructive energy which related to us with that thing. We may relate in other ways with other negative things, but not with that, because one must have generated a vast amount of negative destructive energy and must have generated very little constructive and harmonious energy to have been related with such work and conditions on the external plane. Now, what we must learn is how to live in order to antidote this negative energy. There never was a cause, but what has its cure. Jesus said, I came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it, and he taught us how to fulfill it. He said, love your enemies. It is not sufficient to love your friends because even sinners love their friends, but love your enemies. Generate this harmonious, constructive energy not only for those who love us, but directed toward all mankind. The old thought idea that we are servants and must be meek and humble, that we are worms of the dust and must get down on our knees and crawl, is a false interpretation of small, narrow, intellectually negative minds. Jesus' conception did not mean anything of that kind. He meant that in the glory and greatness of our own manhood and womanhood, in the knowledge that we are one with the universal life, in the understanding and promise that we are sons of God now and joint heirs with Jesus and the rest of the world in that sonship, and that in accordance with our ability to express this God consciousness in each one of us, in accordance with our ability to become more and more constructive and harmonious in our work, do we become more and more godlike. Love them that hate and despise you. Anyone could hate those that hate and despise them. Even sinners do that, he said, but love them that say all manner of evil things against you. We must realize that when we want to cease attracting to us the hatred, the anger, the evil sayings of the world, we must quit generating within ourselves the energy which relates us with such things. We all know that should we want to conduct a business of any kind, we would get in that section of the city where the business is. In other words, we would get into the business currents. We would not go out on a farm and try to run a big department store. No, we would get in the center where the currents are concentrated for business. So when we want harmony in our lives, we want to get into and relate with the currents where harmony is. And the only way to establish that relationship is in our thought world. Thought is the only real motive power there is, and the way to obtain more energy is to relate with it through inspiring the mind. A man who was down and out financially in the business world came to me recently. He had in years gone by been very successful. He had had an income of many $1,000s a year, but he still retained many securities, but they were worthless in their present condition, and he had been unable to change that condition. He said, "What's the matter with me?" I said, "Nothing, you're all right. only you need fixing. It's not what you've been doing so much as the way you have been doing it. And there is where the psychology of life comes in. Now, this man had been trying to force things to him. Everything that came in contact with him felt the law of his hand and had to submit to it. The law of force is mighty. I could talk volumes showing you its relationship, not only in individuals, but in national life. It has swayed the fortunes of empires, controlled the destinies of kings and princes, upheld or destroyed the lords of the earth. The nations that have grown under the law of force thrive until the time comes when some other nation under the same law becomes still stronger, and then it pays the penalty. So it is with the individual life. We can win big under this law of force, but the time comes when some other force gets stronger than ours. And be ye not deceived, for God, the great universal law, is not mocked. And he that lives by the sword, by force, shall perish by the sword, by force. And so when this stronger force comes, as it does to every life that lives under its law, the lesser force goes down. I said to this man, that is your trouble. You have been living under this law of force. Your atmosphere breathes it. Every gesture of your hand, every word you speak, every intonation of your voice tells the story to one who can interpret it. He said, teach me what to do. I told him to take his hand off the lives of other people, to lay down this law of force, and generate within himself the harmony which would bring to him the things he wanted, not by main strength and force, but by love, by the attracting power of this great love energy. Not the sentimental expression of personal love, but the great, wonderful, beautiful love that only sees in all mankind, black or white, red or yellow, the one great God life in everything, man, animal, vegetable, mineral, the great God consciousness in all and through all. We do not have to love the manifestations of mankind. We do not have to love their various actions, but we want to love the life that is in them. We want to make union with that life and recognize our oneness with it. This man had been trying to materialize a deal of $1.5 million. He had been working at it for about 2 years. Again and again, he would bring it almost to the closing point, but when victory was within his grasp, some unseen hand, as it were, would snatch it away. Shortly after he came to me, a new opportunity was presented, and he again started in to consummate the deal, but with the understanding that he was privileged to open negotiations with others, should he so desire. Before he had progressed very far with this first deal, another offer to open negotiations came from another party, and on better terms and conditions than the first one. And as he became more harmonious within himself, became more and more attractive to harmonious things and conditions, a still better proposition came to him. And he kept on until he had received the 5th proposition, the best of all. This one was highly satisfactory to both parties, and in less than a week, the contract was closed on this $1.5 million deal. But there was another thing necessary. A mortgage must be filed before the money was available, and this man hadn't money to pay the cost of filing the mortgage, which was about $500. That $500 seemed as far off as the $1.5 million that it had been. $500 standing between him and $1.5 million, and he could not raise it? I said, that money will come to you. You don't need to know where it's coming from. You've been working on the external plane and can only look at things objectively. Born one might say, why, he could go to any bank and borrow $500. Possibly you could, I don't know. But I do know that the conditions in this case were such it could not be done. It might also be asked, didn't he have friends with whom he could borrow? Yes, lots of friends that were willing to lend at a price. But there are some prices that are too great to pay for anything, no matter what it is. I told him that the $500 would come to him over perfectly harmonious and constructive lines, a line of transference that would be for his highest, best, and greatest good in every way. 2 days before he expected to use the money, it was in his hands and from a source he did not know existed. It came to him without any consideration or conditions. The man who let him have the money said, "I have been in that position myself, where at the psychological moment a little money would have been the thing for me could I only have gotten it. You need it now. Here, it is yours. Take it." In the old thought world, we would say that it was an accident, that it was chance, a great piece of luck. But it was not. It was constructive thought creation. And it was constructive building that Jesus taught when he said, "Love your enemies. Love them that hate you. Love them that speak despitefully against you. Love them that would take away not only your cloak, but your coat. Love them that would take away even that dearest to all men and women, our reputation, because no one can take anything away from us." Every detail of our lives is governed by law. Life after life may generate within itself the negative destructive energy by which it may be made the instrument in the hands of the universal law to work out in our lives the effects of causes we ourselves set in motion. But no life can possibly take anything from us. The lesson for us to learn is harmony. Be so constructive and harmonious within ourselves that the negative energy we have generated in the past will be antidoted with the harmonious energy we are daily and hourly generating now. And that through the constant and continuous creation of this harmonious energy within us, this kindness, this love, this patience, this poise, we thus prevent ourselves becoming the destructive instrument in the hands of the law by which the destructive effects can be worked out in the lives of others. When I made my first trip abroad, it had been promised that should I return to the United States before the close of the season, I would not come to New York. I therefore went to Philadelphia upon my return to this country and continued my work in that city. Within a week, my landlord came to me and said, "Mr. Sears, how long do you expect to remain here?" I had only rented the place from month to month. I said, "I don't know. I had expected to remain until about the 1st of June, and should I find these rooms and this location satisfactory, I shall make this place permanent. But until I have been here for a while, I could not determine definitely." He had an opportunity to lease the rooms, which I occupied, so I said to him, "I do not want to stand in the way of your getting a permanent tenant." My signal always is not to resist anything, for when it can only be held through resistance, I know it does not belong to me. And I let go and allow the law to slough it off my life. I said to him, "When you're satisfied, you have the opportunity to lease this place to good tenants, and you're the only one to judge. Let me know, and I will vacate. I have spent about $150 here that will be useless, thrown away because I cannot use it elsewhere. Now, should you want to reimburse me, all well and good. Just know I will not hold you up, but will go the 1st of the month without a cent. It's for you to determine whether you refund the $150 or not." I did not tell him so, but said to myself, "I believe the money I have expended here belongs to me under this law of harmony, and so I will get it back. Should it not belong to me under this law of divine transference, this law of harmony, I do not want it, and won't get it unless I should force it back, and I would never make anyone give me anything." The day before the 1st of the month, the landlord handed me $135. I had attracted it. He said to me, "Mr. Sears, I don't know why I do this, but I feel that it's right and proper you should have it. I never saw anyone take the attitude you have in a case like this." I said, "That is what I teach, and I put it into practice the best I know how." In the meantime, my son wrote me that the person who had been conducting our work in New York had decided to discontinue the Sunday services. That set me free from the promise to remain away that season, and so I returned and resumed my work. Don't you see how the law of harmony, the law of attraction worked out? When we watch these things, we see again and again that it's not the thing we do, but it's the consciousness, the understanding, the harmony with which we do it. And that is why I have said many times in the matter of collections, don't give because you feel it is your duty, Don't do anything under the law of duty, but do what you feel it a blessed privilege to do. That will help me in this work, because from that plane of consciousness, it is not only constructive to you, but to me as well. We must have faith in the law and our own ability to manifest it. We must learn to know, and then as we go on in our unfoldment, we reach that plane of consciousness where we're able to understand why the people were astonished at Jesus' doctrine, and we become like him, and do not speak like the scribes and Pharisees, but as one having authority. We are able to prophesy without fear of contradiction, because knowing the kind of seed we have sown, the causes we have set in motion, we know what the harvest, the effects, will be.